Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I thought I would revisit something I did a while back, which is to do some simple cuff bracelets that are pretty easy for beginners. And so I picked out some green tourmalines to be the center stones for each of them, and I came up with some simple designs that I think will be nice, but relatively easy to pull off. So before we get started on that, I wanted to thank some groups of people. First, I'd like to thank my patrons over on Patreon. They're my core group of supporters. They're a marvelous group of people. I have a new one, Mark B. Thank you for signing up. I think you'll find that that's a great group over there with a lot of knowledge and who are super friendly. So make sure to tap into the community over there. And thank you to all my patrons for your support. I couldn't do this without your help. The other group are my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 24,600, which is amazing. Thank you for that. I really do appreciate the nice comments. It's really nice to know when people let me know that I've helped them in some way, so it feels like I'm doing some good here then, and I do appreciate that. Thank you also for the super thanks and the buy me coffees and the merch purchases and my ebook purchases. Those things make my channel sustainable and help me to continue doing this, so thank you for that. All right, well, let's get started on these three different simple cuff bracelets. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks that are available on my merch store if you're interested. This particular model has a gauge to inches to millimeters chart, which I find pretty useful. Some of the other ones have some different information regarding metalsmithing on them. What I like most about them is the dot matrix in the background. It helps me to draw better pictures. And I do draw a picture of pretty much everything that I make anymore and keep a record of it. I found that since I started the YouTube channel that's a really nice thing, and it kind of keeps me able to revisit things that I've made in the past if I want to see how I did it, because I've made so many things now that I don't remember all of them. So get yourself one or two of those. They're super handy. This is what I had in mind today. I picked out three tourmalines. Here's the one I haven't made a bezel for. I did. If you're interested in learning how to make a bezel, there's a link to a video there. I will make one of them on camera here, but I made two of them in advance. These are all slightly irregular. I got them in a big jar of different tourmalines, so I'm not sure which one I'm going to put where, but I haven't made a bezel for this one yet, so we'll make that first. But these two I already did, so we'll put one of these on each one of these bracelets. Like I said, I don't know which one, but I think they'll be pretty. Like I said, these are pretty simple, and we're going to do some different things for each of them. I have a relatively simple plan in mind. For this one, I'm probably going to make cuts with my saw and then widen them out a little bit with a file to make them nice and symmetrical. So we'll have to measure those out carefully so I get them pretty symmetrical. This one is going to actually be made up of, I'm going to make it a little shorter than this because I didn't have a long enough piece to make a great big bracelet, but I'm going to use some 16 gauge. This is about 16 gauge thick. This is some sheet that I rolled out of some scrap. If you want to see how to do that, there's a video I did a while back about that. That's a useful skill when silver prices are so high right now. You can use your scrap and make some new silver. So we're going to make this into a bracelet, and we'll put some 16 gauge round as a border to give it kind of an outline. And then I'm going to stamp it with a little asterisk kind of looking stamp, and we'll see how that turns out. My biggest issue with doing stuff like that is getting consistent stamps. Stamping isn't my strongest suit, so we'll see if we can do a good job on that. I'll try. This third one is just going to be three pieces of 14 gauge round soldered together next to each other to make kind of a stripy sort of looking bracelet. So I think we'll get some good variety. They'll be all a little bit different, but they're all relatively simple pieces. So we'll start with this one, I think. And what I did for this one is actually going to be a little bit thinner than I drew it. This is a piece of 10 gauge square that I actually made out of an ingot as well. And then I rolled it through the rolling mill to make it about 16 gauge thick on this dimension. So it's going to have a slightly narrower profile than that. I originally cut the piece the same length as this, and then after I rolled it through the rolling mill, it was that much longer. So that'll be our first band, but for now, let's make a bezel for this. I'm going to use, oh, by the way, 10 gauge square is 2.6 millimeters, I think, originally. like I said, I rolled it down to about 1.3. And then this is 1.3 millimeters because it's 16 gauge on both types. 14 gauge round is 1.6 millimeters. The base of the bezels, I'm using 22 gauge, which is 0.66 millimeters. And then the bezel strip I have is fine silver bezel at 26 gauge. It's 4.76 millimeters tall, and it's 0.41 millimeters thick. So it's a little taller than I probably need, but I can cut it shorter when I get to that stage. So let's make ourselves a bezel for this one. This is probably the prettiest tourmaline out of the batch. It's really clear, and it's got an intense green color. So there's lots of pretty tourmalines in my little jar of tourmalines I picked up at the last show, but most are pink or red. And I thought it would be fun to do some green ones this time. Sometimes I'll do open backs for things like this, but since we're mounting it on a band, I'm just going to solder it down. We're just going to use a very shiny piece of silver right underneath the stone to make it kick light back out at us. Some people use argentium because it doesn't tarnish nearly as bad, at least for things like this where you put a little bit of argentium silver underneath the stone. So I have a company that said they're sending me some argentium to play with, so we'll see if that gets here pretty soon, hopefully. We can see how it works. I'm going to make this mark just a little bit beyond where they meet. Oops. Oh, there it is. I thought I knocked it on the floor. Yesterday I knocked a piece of... 2 days ago? 3 days ago I knocked a component I was making on the floor and I never did find it. It's amazing how far things will move when they hit the floor sometimes. I use mostly hard silver sheet solder when I'm doing stuff. I will occasionally use some paste solder nowadays if needed, but for the longest time I just use that. I use a liquid flux that I drip on with a dropper bottle, and my torch is a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch. It pulls in atmospheric air through this hole here and mixes it with gas in the torch tip. Produces a flame that's in the 4,000 to 4,500 degree Fahrenheit range. And it's a great torch for silver. It's hotter than a propane or a butane torch and not as hot as an oxyacetylene, which is a little bit more than you probably need for most silver jobs. Most times when you start getting big silver projects that are kind of laid up in big areas, like bracelet bands and stuff like that, it starts to get hard to do them with those smaller torches, like the little portable butane torches, or the plumber's propane torches, which can work as well, but sometimes it's hard to get the entire piece up to temperature with those kind of heat sources. So if you use one of those, you'll have to let me know if you're capable of doing these particular bracelets. I feel like maybe you can, because there's not so much metal in these ones as there is in a big, huge cuff bracelet. So sometimes those are difficult to use one of those miniature torches for, because you just can't get enough heat into it. Okay, I'm going to make this into an angular shape to make it easier to solder. One thing that's key to getting a good solder joint on a bezel, if you didn't know this, is pushing it past where they meet so that when you do put them in place, they're pushing together firmly. If you don't do that, because the metal has a tendency to relax under the heat as it anneals, it has a tendency to pull apart. So if you just barely have it touching and you heat it and it pulls apart, you'll get a bad solder joint. Generally it'll solder in the middle but leave a gap on either side. And then, what would people say about your jewelry? They'd say, did you see Chad's bracelet with that terrible gap in his bezel? How embarrassing. can't have that. Alright, so I have a little bit of solder over here, so I'm going to put a piece right there. It doesn't take very long to heat these up, these bezels, when they're so small like this. So you just don't have a lot of mass in them. Okay, let's shape this. I'm going to put the solder joint on the side where the long side of the oval is, so we don't have to curve it as much. I'm just going to shape this. People like bracelets, but generally it's hard to sell a big cuff bracelet because sometimes you're charging $300 or $400 for it because, number one, there's a lot of materials in it. Number two, it's quite a bit of work to make one of those. And number three, the market will bear that generally because that's just the price that those sorts of things tend to go for. And so it's nice to have something that's also a cuff bracelet that's a little lower price point maybe because you're not using so many materials. And it's also a little daintier, so people who prefer little delicate things have something to choose from. Not everybody loves great big things. Well, I think we did pretty good on size. I don't see a lot of space around the stone, between the stone and the bezel. So let's kind of clean this up a bit. Alright, a little piece of 22 here. Normally I'd use 26 probably, but since this is going to be soldered onto, it's going to be the point where this is, one point it's soldered to something else there. I think I want it to be a pretty solid little base. You probably could get by with something thinner if you wanted to. Just going to cut a corner off of there. I get asked about these shears all the time. These are Fisker's craft shears. And they can be found, these particular ones I got at Home Depot, I believe. As you can tell by the color scheme. I think I found those in the home and garden section. You can find them at hobby stores, fabric stores, just general retail chain stores. They're good for cutting silver, but when you start cutting things as thick as like 18, then it starts to put a lot of wear and tear on it because they're not really designed for that thick of stuff. But they will cut it, and eventually they'll wear out probably a little bit more quickly than they would have if I wasn't treating them badly. My favorite cutters that I ever found were these cutters made by Oxo years ago. And they had plastic handles, but they had these nice straight blades, and they cut like butter through thick silver. And then they quit making that model, which was really sad. I even called Oxo, their headquarters, and asked them if they had any old non-sold ones of that variety, just to see if I could buy some, so I can have a new pair. Because my handle finally broke on mine. Okay, I'm just kind of pushing those up against the side. The heat around the outside of where the bezel and the sheet come together. And get that seam to fill all the way around the outside. You want to make sure we get a nice seam. Alright, so let's just trim this off. You always want to trim straight up and down with cutters like this. You don't want to angle it under because you'll cut through the solder joint a little bit. And so you can leave a gap there then if you're not careful. So let's just file this flush with the bottom of the bezel. If you struggle with hand problems, you could probably secure this in a little vise or something to do this stage. That's pretty good. So I'm going to set that to the side for now. And I think we need to figure out a way to lay out the lines on this long, skinny piece of flattened 10 gauge square. This was 5.5 inches, which is kind of a small bracelet. I'm going to make it just a little bit longer. Okay, let's see if we can find the center of this. Right about there. Pretty close. Right on that side, right about there. Find a little T-pin here. And I have this little square that I think I'm going to use kind of to make sure I get a pretty straight across line. Let's just scribe a little line there. Okay. And then I think from there, let's go every 5 millimeters or so. Okay, I'm going to do a few of these because you probably don't need to see all of them, but I'm going to file part way through. I'm going to try and do it as consistently as I can. Oh, I don't need the middle one to be done, so I'm going to solder a bezel on top of it. That's pretty good. So now I think I'm going to use the corner of my file to widen those a little, make them more pronounced. So what we're going to do is called sweat soldering, and that's where I'm going to melt a little bit of solder on the back of this so it's already in place. And then we can just balance it right where it needs to go in the center here. Heat the whole thing up until it flows again. And the thing to remember when you're doing stuff like this is the disparity in mass between the various pieces. There's very little mass in this compared to this. So it's going to take longer to bring this up to the 1450 degrees that it needs to reach in order for it to stick to this nicely. This will reach temperature very quickly, so I have to almost avoid the bezel overheating this. So. Using a generous amount of solder there to make sure you get a nice big puddle back here. That's pretty centered. I'm going to make this into a shape that'll fit into my pickle jar. I'll probably straighten it back out when we go to polish it. And we can start on the next one. It's going to be around this piece right here. So I did my best. I used a saw to cut this one out because it's 16 gauge, which is just a little thicker than my cutters will generally cut. So I tried to make the edges as nice as I could. That's landed pretty flat. So one of the things I want to do, this is 16 gauge round here. I should have enough. I'm going to cut a piece just a little bit longer. So I think I'm going to use a miter vise jig and do a little 45-degree angle on this. If you haven't seen these before, these are pretty handy for doing angles. These simple ones. Sometimes when you want to get a real precise measurement, if you use a marker like this, because I want this 45 degree on this side to be right on, so it needs to be kind of like right from there. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to cut a short one and do a 45 on it so that I can line these up, and that'll keep this from rolling around too much. We can solder on two ends. Allows you to pick up a little bit of solder. place it where we want it to go. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So I'm going to make that second L shape. We'll solder that on. I think I'm going to do this one in 2 pieces. So I did this one a little bit longer, and then I'll cut it off and then I'll piece in a little piece there. So. Our next step is going to be stamping this. And so before I do that, I'm going to let it pickle for a while. I think we're pretty good actually, so let's bend this a little bit. Toss that in the pickle for a while. Okay, what I did on this one was I scribed a line down the center. Actually, it's kind of a double line, so I can kind of center my stamp in that. And then I made a mark across each spot that I wanted to put a little stamp, so I could attempt to get them in a nice straight line, which has not been my strongest suit in the past. But we'll give it a try and see. I normally just use a plastic hammer, but I want this to be pressed pretty deeply, and so I'm going to use a dead blow hammer, this old ancient dead blow hammer I have. And I'm going to try and spend some time getting these positioned pretty well. I position them every 8 millimeters. So okay. I just need to solder on this bezel. I'll do it like we did before. Okay, we'll let that one pickle and get on with the third one. Alright, let's solder these three together. That should be pretty good. I find it easiest to go up and down like this rather than like this. The more the heat stays on the piece, the better luck getting a nice solder flow. You could have just laid it on there. I'm used to doing it that way. So. Make sure I got a good solder seam there. Looks pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and bend this so it'll fit into my pickle jar, just like the other ones. With that pickle. When I come back, I'll have the stones set, and I'll show you the final product. So I got these all set and polished. Here's the first one. Let's see. I think that one turned out okay. It's kind of dainty and just kind of sort of modern, I think, maybe. This one, I think, well, it has the prettiest stone out of the three, I think. So it just glows. But I like that. That's simple, but it's kind of cool. I think that's a nice, successful one. That someone will like that. And then this one is pretty standard, but also sort of modern-ish. With kind of lines like that. So tell me which one, if any of these, that you like in the comments. I'd love to hear what your feelings are about them. And how would you do them? Would you make any different alterations? There's a lot of variations you could do. Of course, you could stamp this one in a lot of different ways, or not stamp it, or do whatever. Lots of different possibilities. So. Okay, well that was 3 simple cuff bracelets. I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. If you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. That really helps to get my channel promoted, and I do appreciate it so much. I would also love it if you took a moment and headed over to my main channel page on YouTube. I have 540 plus videos. I've been doing this for almost 4 years now, and I do 3 per week, so there's quite an accumulation of content over there. I think you'll find lots of projects, lots of skills for different levels of metalsmiths, so check those out. Subscribe to my channel. It doesn't cost anything. I'd love to have you as a follower. And then make sure to hit the video description down below. In addition to information about this particular project, there's some important links there as well. There's a link to my Patreon site, and you can find out about the different tiers of membership over there. The first tier being where you can just get my YouTube videos without having to watch the YouTube advertising. That's kind of nice. The other tiers above that have some different perks, including Patreon exclusives, some live streaming, and some other perks like that. So check those out. I'd love to have you as a follower over there as well. There's also a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks I talked about early on. I find those super useful. There's also some other merch there, so get yourself a present. And then finally there's a link to my ebook, my latest one, which is 2024's tutorial guide. That covers all of the different tutorials I did in 2024. There's a page for each of them. It has a picture of the sketch I drew, a picture of the final product, a list of materials you need for the project, a difficulty rating, and some notes I made about the project itself, including things like, would I do it differently? Did I learn something? Was it a good project? Was it a failed project? All sorts of stuff like that. So it's a nice way to have a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips, and a really super nice way to support my channel. So thanks in advance if you do that. There's even a package deal if you get 2023s and 2024s, so check it out. All right, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.